You're about to see something that officially never happened. A video, grainy, fast, just seconds long, a missile streaking across open water, and then impact. Not near a ship, not a warning shot, a direct hit. And the target, according to Iranian sources, it's the USS Abraham Lincoln, one of the most heavily protected aircraft carriers on Earth. But here's the problem: the United States has said nothing. No confirmation, no denial, no emergency broadcast, no press conference, just silence. And that silence, that's where things get dangerous. Because if this video is real, if even part of it is real, then something massive just happened in the waters of the Middle East, and the world hasn't caught up yet. Let's rewind. Over the past few days, tensions between the US and Iran weren't just rising, they were boiling. Naval movements increased, surveillance flights intensified, oil shipping lanes became tighter, riskier. Warnings were issued, but quietly, not publicly, not loudly, just enough to signal something is coming. Then suddenly, this video drops. No buildup, no official release through global media. Instead, it appears first through regional channels, circulating online, spreading like wildfire across encrypted networks and military forums. And what it shows is precise, too precise. Frame by frame, analysts are already tearing it apart. The missile trajectory, low altitude. The angle, not random, calculated. The timing, perfect. This wasn't a warning shot. This was a message. But here's where it gets unsettling. The USS Abraham Lincoln isn't just any ship. It's a floating fortress, layered defenses, advanced radar, electronic warfare systems designed specifically to intercept threats like this. For a missile to get through, something would have had to fail, or worse, something new has entered the battlefield. Now, pause for a second. Think about what that means. If Iran has developed or deployed a system capable of bypassing U.S. carrier defenses, then the balance of naval power in the region doesn't just shift, it fractures. But before jumping to conclusions, there's another question we need to ask. Why release the video at all? Because in modern warfare, what you show is just as important as what you do. Releasing footage like this serves a purpose: intimidation, psychological warfare, control of the narrative. But it also carries risk, because if this claim is exaggerated or false, it can trigger responses that spiral fast. And that's exactly where we are now. Military analysts are split. Some say the footage is real, but the target may not be the USS Abraham Lincoln. Others believe it's a simulation, enhanced or staged to send a signal. And then there's a third group, the ones who aren't saying anything at all, which in intelligence circles often means one thing: they're verifying something serious. Meanwhile, U.S. naval activity in the region has quietly shifted. Satellite tracking suggests repositioning, support vessels adjusting formation, air patrol patterns changing subtly but noticeably. No announcements, no headlines, just movement. And that movement raises a chilling possibility. What if the strike didn't sink the carrier, but hit it just enough? Enough to damage, enough to test defenses, enough to send a message without triggering full scale war? Because that's the line both sides are walking right now. Push too far, and it explodes. Hold back, and you look weak. But something about this feels different, because usually after a major incident, there's noise, statements, denials, clarifications. This time, nothing. And in geopolitics, silence is rarely accidental. Now, here's where things start to get even more complicated, because within hours of the video surfacing, something else happened. Oil prices twitched. Shipping insurance rates began creeping upward, and private security alerts were quietly issued to commercial vessels in the region. No public panic, but behind the scenes, everyone noticed. And that means one thing: even if the world doesn't fully understand what just happened, the people who need to understand it already do. So now we're left with a situation where a video claims a direct hit on a U.S. aircraft carrier. The U.S. hasn't responded, Iran isn't backing down, and military movements are shifting in silence. That's not stability. That's the calm before something bigger. But here's the question no one is answering yet: was this a real attack, or the beginning of a much larger operation? Because if this was just a test, then what comes next won't be a warning. And in the next part, we break down the video itself, frame by frame, and uncover the hidden details that might reveal whether this was a bluff or the first strike in something far more dangerous. Now, here's where everything starts to feel off, because when experts began analyzing the footage, really analyzing it, something strange happened. The more they looked, the less certain they became. At first glance, the clip is simple: a missile, a fast moving camera feed, open water, a large silhouette in the distance, then impact, cut. That's it. No aftermath, no explosion lingering on screen, no second angle, just a single clean strike and silence. But in modern warfare, especially when footage is released intentionally, that kind of simplicity is rare, almost too rare, because usually propaganda footage is designed to prove something. This video, it raises more questions than answers. Let's break it down, frame by frame. First, the missile. Analysts noticed its flight path almost immediately: low altitude, sea skimming. That's not new. Anti-ship missiles have used this tactic for decades, flying just above the water to avoid radar detection. But here's the detail that stood out. The missile appears to make a slight mid-course adjustment, a correction, small but deliberate. That suggests guidance, not just basic targeting, but active tracking. Now think about that. To track a moving aircraft carrier in real time at sea under electronic warfare conditions, you need more than a missile. You need a system, a network, satellite input, drone surveillance, or something else we're not fully seeing yet. And that's where the second anomaly comes in: the camera angle. The footage doesn't look like it was captured from the missile itself. The resolution isn't consistent with onboard targeting cameras. Instead, it feels external, like it's being filmed from a distance, possibly from a drone. But if that's true, then whoever captured this footage wasn't just firing a missile. They were watching it happen in real time, from above. And that changes everything. Because now we're not talking about a single strike. We're talking about coordinated surveillance and attack, a synchronized operation. But here's where things get even more unsettling. When analysts enhance the final frames, the moment just before impact, they notice something on the target: not the full shape, not clear markings, but enough to raise a serious question. The silhouette doesn't perfectly match the USS Abraham Lincoln. Now, that might sound like a minor detail, but in military identification, it's everything. Aircraft carriers have distinct profiles: deck length, tower placement, support structures. And while the ship in the video is large, carrier sized even, some elements don't line up, which leads to three possible scenarios, and none of them are comfortable. Scenario one: it's a different ship, a decoy, a support vessel, or even another nation's asset, which would mean the claim of hitting the USS Abraham Lincoln is exaggerated. But the strike itself, still real. Scenario two: the footage has been altered, enhanced, edited, combined from multiple sources. In other words, information warfare, a visual designed to look convincing enough to create panic. And then there's the third scenario, the one analysts aren't saying out loud, but are quietly considering. What if the ship was real, but the footage was deliberately cut to hide the aftermath? Because remember, we never see the result. No damage assessment, no confirmation of impact effect, no follow up, just the moment of contact and then black. In military messaging, that's unusual. If you want to prove strength, you show the destruction, unless you don't want to reveal how much damage was actually done. And that brings us back to the silence. Because while the video spreads, while speculation builds, official channels remain quiet, but not inactive. Behind the scenes, there are signs, subtle but real. Electronic emissions in the region have shifted. That means communication patterns, military frequencies are changing, either to avoid detection or to respond to something already in motion. And then there's satellite behavior. Certain reconnaissance satellites have adjusted their observation paths, not publicly announced, but tracked by independent observers, which suggests one thing: something in that region has become very important, very quickly. But the biggest clue? It didn't come from Iran or the United States. It came from the sea. Within hours of the video's release, multiple commercial vessels reported receiving updated routing advisories. Quietly, no headlines. But the message was clear: avoid certain zones, increase distance from military assets, stay alert. Shipping companies don't make moves like that based on rumors. They respond to risk, measured, calculated risk. And right now, that risk is rising. So where does that leave us? We have a video that shows a precise strike, but may not show the full truth. We have a claimed target that doesn't perfectly match the visuals. We have silence from official sources, but movement behind the scenes. And we have one more question that hasn't been answered. If this was a demonstration, then what was it demonstrating? Capability, access, or a warning? Because if Iran can track, target, and potentially strike a carrier or something close to it, then every ship in that region just became more vulnerable. And that doesn't just affect the military, it affects trade, energy, global stability. But here's the twist no one expected, because just as analysts were debating the authenticity of the footage, a second piece of information surfaced, brief, unconfirmed, but enough to shift the conversation completely. A report suggesting that the USS Abraham Lincoln may have changed its position hours before the alleged strike, which raises a chilling possibility. Was the ship ever there at all? Or did something else take the hit? And in the next part, we dive into what happens if this wasn't a direct attack, but part of a much bigger strategy, one that could pull multiple countries into a conflict that no one is ready for. Now imagine this for a second. What if the missile, the video, the silence was never about the USS Abraham Lincoln at all? What if this wasn't an attack but a test? Because the moment that second report surfaced, the one suggesting the carrier had already shifted position, everything changed, not publicly, but inside military circles. The conversation flipped. Suddenly, the question wasn't, did Iran hit a US carrier? It became, what were they actually trying to prove? And to understand that, you have to zoom out, way out. For years, Iran hasn't tried to match the US Navy ship for ship. That's a losing game. Instead, it's been building something else, an asymmetric strategy, missiles, drones, fast attack craft, electronic warfare, not to dominate the sea, but to make it too dangerous for anyone else to control. And aircraft carriers, they're the ultimate symbol of control. Floating air bases, power projection platforms, the backbone of US naval dominance. So if you can threaten a carrier, you don't just challenge a ship, you challenge the entire system behind it. Now go back to the video. A precise strike, coordinated surveillance, ambiguous results. That's not random, that's messaging. And here's the key. In modern conflict, you don't always need to destroy something. You just need to prove that you can. Because once that doubt is planted, every decision changes. Every movement becomes cautious. Every operation becomes slower. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. U.S. naval formations in the region aren't just moving, they're tightening. Spacing between ships is adjusting. Air cover patterns are becoming denser. Defensive postures are increasing, not dramatically, not visibly to the public, but enough to signal one thing. They're taking this seriously. Now, here's where it gets even more dangerous. Because if this was a demonstration, then it's only the beginning. Think about escalation. If Iran shows it can track and strike or appear to strike a carrier, then the next step isn't necessarily another missile. It could be something more complex, swarms of drones, simultaneous attacks from multiple angles, electronic jamming combined with physical strikes overwhelm the defenses, not with one weapon, but with many. And that's exactly the kind of warfare the US Navy has been preparing for. But preparing doesn't mean it's been tested under real pressure. And this, whatever it was, might be the closest thing yet. Now, flip the perspective. From Washington's point of view, this isn't just about a video, it's about credibility. Because if the perception spreads that US carriers are vulnerable, then deterrence weakens. Allies begin to question, adversaries begin to calculate, and that's a dangerous shift. So, what are the options? Option one, ignore it. Treat the video as propaganda. Avoid escalation, but that carries risk because silence can be interpreted as uncertainty or worse, confirmation. Option two, respond indirectly, increase presence, run exercises, send signals without acknowledging the incident, which interestingly is already happening. And then there's option three, the one no one wants to talk about, direct response, not necessarily against Iran itself, but against its capabilities, its launch platforms, its surveillance systems. Because if you believe your most valuable assets are being targeted, you don't wait. And that's where things can spiral. Because Iran won't see that as defense, it will see it as escalation. And escalation doesn't stay contained. Now add another layer. Regional players, countries in the Middle East are watching this very closely because they're in the blast radius, politically, economically, and physically. If the situation escalates, they're not observers, they're participants, whether they want to be or not. Oil routes run through these waters. Trade flows depend on stability here. Any disruption, even temporary, can send shockwaves globally, and those shockwaves have already started. Energy markets are reacting quietly but steadily. Insurance costs for tankers are adjusting. Risk assessments are being rewritten because even the possibility of conflict is enough to trigger real world consequences. Now, here's the part that makes this even more intense. What if this wasn't just about Iran and the United States? What if other actors are watching this as a test case? Because if a system has been demonstrated, real or perceived, others will study it, replicate it, adapt it, and suddenly what started as a regional tension becomes a global shift in naval warfare. But there's still one piece missing, one detail that hasn't been fully explained: the timing. Why now? Why release this video at this exact moment? Because timing in geopolitics is never random. It aligns with something: a negotiation, a movement, a decision behind closed doors. And that's where things get even more complicated, because just as this video was spreading, another development was unfolding quietly, almost unnoticed. A series of diplomatic communications suddenly went silent. Talks that were ongoing stalled, channels that were active paused. And when diplomacy goes quiet at the same time, military tension rises. That's not coincidence. That's a shift, which raises a question that's far more dangerous than the missile itself. Was this video meant to send a message to the public or to someone specific behind the scenes? Because if it's the second, then what we're seeing isn't just a show of force, it's part of a negotiation, a pressure tactic, a warning delivered not through words, but through impact. And if that's true, then the next move won't be broadcast. It will happen quietly, suddenly. And when it does, it won't look like a test anymore. It will look like the beginning of something much harder to control. And in the final part, we break down the scenarios that could unfold next, from controlled standoff to a chain reaction that pulls the entire region into conflict. Because right now, we're standing at a line that hasn't been crossed yet, but it's getting closer. Right now, nothing has officially happened. No confirmed strike, no confirmed damage, no confirmed retaliation. And yet, everything has changed. Because in geopolitics, there's a moment, a very specific moment, when tension stops being theoretical and becomes real. Not when missiles hit, not when ships sink, but when both sides start preparing for what comes next. And that's exactly where we are now. Let's walk through what happens from here. Not the headlines, not the public statements, but the real scenarios being quietly considered behind closed doors. Scenario one: controlled containment. This is the path everyone says they want. The video fades, no confirmation is ever given. Both sides increase readiness but avoid direct confrontation. Iran claims capability. The US maintains deterrence. Tension stays high but stable. On the surface, it looks like nothing happened, but beneath it, everything shifts. Naval operations become more cautious. Carriers operate further from high risk zones, more reliance on drones, satellites, long range strikes. In other words, the battlefield changes without a single official shot fired. But here's the problem with containment: it depends on perfect discipline. One miscalculation, one misread signal, one commander reacting a little too fast, and containment breaks, which leads to the second scenario. Scenario two: shadow escalation, no public war, but a series of quiet, deniable actions: cyber attacks targeting infrastructure, electronic warfare disrupting systems, unclaimed strikes on surveillance assets, each move just below the threshold of open conflict, each side testing the other, pushing, probing, measuring response. And this is where things get dangerous, because shadow conflicts don't have clear boundaries. There's no official start, no clear end, just a constant increase in pressure until something slips. A drone goes down, a ship gets too close, a system fails at the wrong moment, and suddenly what was deniable becomes undeniable. Now we move into the third scenario. Scenario three: direct confrontation. This is the one no one wants, but it's also the one no one can fully rule out. If the US believes its carrier or any major asset was genuinely targeted, then the logic changes. Because carriers aren't just military tools, they're strategic symbols, and any credible threat against them demands a response. Not necessarily immediate, not necessarily public, but calculated, deliberate. That could mean targeting missile sites, disabling surveillance networks, neutralizing launch capabilities, precision strikes, limited but unmistakable. And here's where the spiral begins. Because from Iran's perspective, that's not defense, that's attack, and response follows response. Missiles answered with missiles, drones met with interceptors, naval maneuvers becoming more aggressive, and within days, the region transforms, shipping lanes disrupted, airspace restricted, military assets repositioned at full speed, and then global impact. Oil prices surge, markets react, allies take sides. What started as a video becomes a crisis. But there's one more scenario, the one that's harder to see, but potentially the most dangerous of all. Scenario 4, strategic misinterpretation. What if the video wasn't meant to signal an attack, but was interpreted that way? What if the strike wasn't aimed at a US carrier, but at something else entirely? A test, a demonstration, a message to a different audience. But in the fog of tension, it gets misread. Because in high stakes environments, perception becomes reality, and decisions aren't made with perfect information. They're made with partial signals, fragments, assumptions, and once a decision is made, it can't be taken back. That's the real danger, not just what happened, but what each side believes happened. Because belief drives action, and action drives escalation. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. A single video, unconfirmed, ambiguous, and yet it has triggered military movement, market reactions, strategic recalculations. That's power, not the power of destruction, but the power of uncertainty. And uncertainty is the most unstable force in geopolitics because it doesn't settle. It builds, it spreads, it forces decisions. And those decisions, once made, set events in motion that no one can fully control. So, where does that leave us? Right now, on a line between demonstration and confrontation, between signaling and striking, between tension and conflict. And that line is getting thinner because whether the video was real, exaggerated, or something in between, it has already achieved one thing. It has changed how both sides see the battlefield. And once perception changes, strategy follows, movement follows, and eventually action follows. So the real question isn't, did a missile hit the USS Abraham Lincoln? The real question is, what happens next now that the possibility exists? Because in modern warfare, sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't when something explodes. It's the moment just before, when everyone is waiting, watching, and deciding. And right now, that's exactly where the world is, watching, waiting, and one decision away from something much bigger.